So, of course, we start with the game in WA, the Dockers up against Carlton. Fremantle have to keep on winning to secure their top 8 spot, and they were challenged well and truly throughout the afternoon, but they were too good in the final term, kicked away, and in the end won by 27 points. Fremantle 94, Carlton 67. Now, there were a couple of injury concerns from this game. First of all, Hayden Young came off in the opening term with an issue with his groin. Unfortunately, he was subbed out at quarter time, and O'Farrell for the Blues landed awkwardly in a marking contest in the second term, and he was subbed out just before half time with a knee injury. And finally, Adam Sard unfortunately copped a shin from Andrew Brayshaw in the final term, connected his nose, had to come off with a blood rule, probably would have to have an HIA, and he may miss next week through concussion, but the test will be going on probably at the end of the game, so we'll probably have to keep an eye on the news story throughout the week to see if he is out for next week for Carlton. Now, getting to the game itself, and what a start for the Blues. They kicked the first 4 goals of this game, dominated in the midfield, and their pressure was immense. For a team that's been one of the worst pressure teams in the competition this year, it was a sight to behold for the Blues throughout the opening term. Now, the Dockers did get one in response, however, with a 5-2 opening term for the Blues, they led by 18 points at quarter time. Now, Fremantle did get the opening goal of the second term, but the Blues weren't letting up on the pressure factor. They were immense with their pressure in the first half. And with the Blues getting 3-2 in the second term, they increased their lead at half time to 24 points. But Fremantle finally showed some fight in the early stages of the third term, probably for the first time in the game, if I'm being honest. They kicked the first 3 goals of the quarter, and they were within 7 points. However, Carlton did respond with a goal late to push back out to over a 2-goal margin, but again, Fremantle would respond with the last goal of the third term, and at 3/4 time, Carlton's lead was whittled down to just 8 points. But as we've seen so many times in the last 2 months for the Dockers, they absolutely stormed home. In the final quarter, they almost doubled their score. They got 7-2 to Carlton's only 1 goal. And in the end, the Dockers ran home for a massive victory, which they needed to keep their top 8 hopes alive. So well done to the Dockers. They were well and truly challenged throughout the afternoon, so well done for them to stand up to it and get a nice win, jump into 5th spot after that victory, so a great job from the Dockers. And Carlton, they fought hard in the first quarter, probably the first half, but the pressure dropped off, and once that happened, the Blues always struggled to keep up with the Dockers in the end. But for now, let's move to the statistics of this game, of course. On the multiple goal kickers for the Dockers, 3 goals to Tracy, Amos and Voss, 2 to Dudley. For the Blues, sole multiple goal kicker was Francis Evans with the 2. On the disposals for Fremantle, Clark with the 30, 27 to Jackson, 23 to Brayshaw, 19 to Sarong and 17 to Ryan. And for Carlton, Hewitt with the 36 along with Patrick Cripps, 23 to Haynes, 22 to Lord and 19 to Hollins. And finally on the AFL fantasy front for Freo, Jackson with the 106, Clark with the 102, Brayshaw 90, Warner with the 87 and Darcy with the 76. And for Carlton, Patrick Cripps with the 134, Hewitt with the 122, Mackay with the 90 along with Nick Haynes and 86 to Tom de Koning. Now before we get to the votes for this game, of course we have to mention the members vote for round 20. How the members vote works for you guys. For the review in 2025, a 3-2-1 voting system is awarded for every single game of the AFL season on the channel. And each round, players who receive 3 votes in the game have a chance to get a bonus vote. I will decide the 4 best players from the round who will enter a poll exclusive for channel members to vote on, and the winner of that poll will receive the bonus vote for the round, the members vote. And at the end of the 2025 AFL season, every vote counts. So this is your chance to have your say on the 3rd ever Boundary Riders medalist. So if that appeals to you, or if you just want to show some extra support on the channel, then make sure to click the channel membership link down below and join in the fun. But for now, let's get back into the video. And the members' vote for round 20 went to the 11-goal performance of Jeremy Cameron. But for now, let's get to the votes for this game. Now, my brother's given the votes for this one as well. He has gone with 3 votes, Luke Jackson, 2 votes, Patrick Cripps, and the 1 vote to George Hewitt. So now we get to the Cats v Power contest, and Geelong going into this one as heavy favourites, and they smashed Port Adelaide off the park in the end, winning by a massive 88 points, 153 to the Cats, 65 to the Power. Now there was one injury concern from this one, which was Jace Burgoyne, came off in the 3rd term with an ankle injury, and he was subbed out soon after. But getting to the game itself, and despite the end scoreline, Port Adelaide had a pretty nice start to this game. Even though the Cats did largely win the territory battle in the opening term, Port Adelaide did take a lot of their chances throughout the first quarter. And heading into the quarter time break, scores are all square. However, cracks started to emerge for Port Adelaide in the second term. The Cats kicked the first 2 goals of the quarter, and even though they missed a lot of chances throughout the second term, Geelong kicking 5 goals, 6 at half time, they led by 30 points. And the game was pretty much gone at that point, but Geelong made it a certainty in the third term. They had a 9-goal-to-1 quarter, and the game was truly done at that point. Now, even though Port Adelaide did okay to not let this blow out by over 100 points, where it looked like it was destined to in that third term, in the end, the Cats got a nice percentage boosting win, while Port Adelaide are destined to probably have their worst season under Ken Hinkley in his final year. So the Cats definitely were looking for Jeremy Cameron today. That is a 100% fact. He got 6, which is a pretty decent performance from him. But I think Lachie Jones, his opponent, did quite a nice job. However, the power, I think my brother put it perfectly to me throughout the afternoon. He said, when the times get tough, Port Adelaide give up. And that was a true sentiment today. Just as soon as they got hard done by throughout that second term through to the third, they basically just gave up, bent over and took it. And really disappointing end to Ken Hinkley's career at Port Adelaide. I think he deserves a little bit more than this. But for now, let's move to the statistics of this game, of course. On the multiple goal kickers for the Cats, Cameron with 6, 4 to Martin as the sub in 5 minutes, by the way. Shannon Neal with the 3, and 2 to Stengel, Bowes and Holmes. For Port Adelaide, Georgiades with the 3, Lord with the 2. On the disposals for Geelong, Holmes with the 35, 30 to Smith and Myers, 26 to Manor, 24 to Bowes. And for Port, Wines with the 32, Boak 24 along with Willem Drew, 20 to Farrell and 18 to Mead. And finally on the AFL fantasy front for the Cats, Holmes with the 136, 122 to Myers, 112 to Bailey Smith, 106 to Neal and 104 to Humphreys. And for the power, Drew with the 120, 119 to Wines, 117 to Sweet, 90 to Boak, and 74 to Kane Farrell. But now we'll get to the votes. My brother has given these ones. He has gone with 3 votes, Max Holmes, 2 votes, Brian Myers, and the 1 vote to Jeremy Cameron. So the first game on Sunday, of course, was the Saints up against North Melbourne. St Kilda coming off one of the biggest wins in the club's recent history. But North Melbourne were up for the fight for the majority of the afternoon, sent a few scares through the Saints camp in the last minutes of the game. However, they were able to hold strong St Kilda and win in the end by 9 points. 78 to the Saints, 69 to the Roos. Now, there was one injury concern from this game, which was Mitch Owens. Unfortunately, hurt his hamstring in the third term, and he was subbed out soon after. But getting to the game itself, and St Kilda were able to kick the first goal of the game, but the Roos were well and truly up for the fight in the opening quarter. They kicked the next 3 goals, and honestly probably could have been further in front as they headed to the quarter-time siren. However, North Melbourne still led by 14 points at the first break. And the Roos were able to kick the first goal of the second term to get out to a team-high 19-point lead. However, St Kilda pretty much dominated the rest of the second term. However, on the scoreboard, they missed so many crucial chances to give themselves a handy lead. They dominated the territory, and even though they did kick the last 3 goals of the opening half, they only led by 1 point heading into the major break. Now, it was pretty level pegging for the first half of the third term before the Saints got a handy break. They kicked 4 goals in a row, and after a 6-goal quarter compared to North Melbourne's 3, St Kilda almost had the game won at 3-quarter time, leading by 23 points. However, the Roos weren't done just yet. In the final quarter, despite not winning the territory battle, they were lethal in front of the big sticks. Kangas kicked 2 goals early in the final term before they missed some crucial chances to make it even closer on the scoreboard before a late mark and goal from Cam Zerha set up for an intriguing finish to the game. However, with the ball going down the Saints' end in the final moments, a free kick was given away where Max Hall was also given 50 to kick the goal on the siren as they ran home winners. Another nail-biter for the Saints. So well done to them. Wasn't as incredible a win as last week for the Saints, but still very good performance. This seems very similar to last year, though, where they had a very good end to a year, but they didn't really use it to their momentum at the start of this season. But hopefully St Kilda can use this sort of momentum at the end of the 2025 season into 2026. And on North Melbourne, look, I mean, you can say the fact that they may get their 5th win of the season sometime the next couple of weeks is actually their best since, I think, 2019, but still a very disappointing year for the Roos. But for now, let's move to the statistics of this game, of course. On the multiple goal kickers for the Saints, Heath and Higgins both with the 2. For the Roos, Larkey with 3, Zerha with 2. On the disposals for St Kilda, Wanganeen Miller with the 36, 26 to Sinclair, 25 to Clark, 24 to Marshall, and 22 to McRae. And for the Roos, McKerchie with the 36, Sheasel 33, Daniel 32, Powell 24, Davies Uniacke with the 21. And finally, on the AFL fantasy front, for the Saints, Marshall with the 142, Wanganeen Miller with the 108, Clark with the 83, Sinclair with the 81, Hill with the 73. And for the Roos, McKerchie with the 119, Sheasel with the 117, Daniel with the 115, Powell with the 97, and Davies Uniacke with the 93. But for now, let's get to the votes in this game. 3 votes, Nasiah Wanganeen-Miller, 2 votes, Rowan Marshall, and the 1 vote to Harry Sheasel. So on Saturday night, of course, it was the big clash between the last 2 champions of the AFL, and Brisbane, with a terrible record at the MCG against Collingwood, had it all up against them, but they responded in perfect fashion, having the lead for the majority of the match, and in the end, running out winners by 27 points. 65 to the Pies, 92 to the Brisbane Lions. Now, there was one injury concern from this game, which was Ryan Lester. Unfortunately, he got concussed throughout the contest, and he was subbed out in the second term. But getting to the game itself, and despite Collingwood get the opening goal of the game, Brisbane proved their worth in the opening term. After that Pies early goal, Brisbane responded with 5 of the next 6, and at quarter time had a very nice lead of 20 points. Now, Collingwood were able to respond early in the second term with getting the first 2 goals of it, and Brisbane did respond, but Collingwood showed why they were the team at the top of the ladder throughout the majority of the season so far, as they kicked 5 of the first 6 goals in the second term to take the lead for the first time since the opening minutes of the contest. However, with Brisbane striking late, they were able to lead by 1 point heading into half-time. And when the Lions got the first 2 goals of the second half, they took a nice handy 13-point lead. However, Collingwood did respond with the next to draw it back to a 7-point margin, but with Brisbane's midfield dominating on the outside, Collingwood just couldn't keep up with their pace, and with Brisbane finishing with the last 2 goals of the third term, they led by 19 points heading into the final change. Now, we knew it was going to be tough for the Lions in the final term, and when Collingwood struck first, I'm sure there would have been a couple of missed heartbeats for Brisbane, but they did respond with the next 2 to almost shut the gate on the game. Collingwood did have their moments in the final quarter, but in the end, Brisbane proved too strong, ran out comfortable winners, knocked Collingwood off their perch at the top of the ladder, and keep their minor premiership hopes alive. So well done to the Brisbane Lions. Great response after a terrible Q clash the week before, so well done to them. And their young star, Logan Morris, had a brilliant game up forward. Really good performance from him, stood up from the front, well done. And Collingwood, 3 losses out of their last 4 games. A few question marks are starting to arise. They have rested a few players over the last few weeks, so not massive concerns for them just yet, but they do need to sort some things out. And with Jeremy Howe out this game, Darcy Moore was truly exposed, so he has to start fixing up his game. But for now, let's get to the statistics of this game. Of course, on the multiple goal kickers for the Pies, sole multiple goal kicker was Sidebottom with the 2. For Brisbane, Logan Morris brilliant with the 6 goals straight. Smith with the 3 goals from 5 touches. Rayner and Bailey with the 2. On the disposals, Josh Dacos and Nick Dacos both with 29. 22 to Pendlebury, 21 to Seal Sidebottom, and 17 to Lockie Schultz. And for the Lions, Neal with 36, McCluggage 34, Dunkley 31, Ashcroft 30, and Fletcher with the 22. And finally, on the AFL fantasy front for the Pies, Josh Dacos 113, Sidebottom 101, Lockie Schultz with the 99, Pendlebury with the 94, Nick Dacos with the 92. And for Brisbane, McCluggage 119, Dunkley 113, Neal 112, Will Ashcroft 109, and Rayner with the 99. But now let's get to the votes in this game. 3 votes, Logan Morris, 2 votes, Hugh McCluggage, and the 1 vote to Lockie Neal. So next up, we get to the Swans v Essendon game. It was really tough conditions, wet and woolly, but the Swans were good enough in the end to hold on in the final quarter and win by 14 points. 68 to the Swans, 54 to the Bombers. Now, it was greasy conditions, as it had been wet, woolly, and just terrible conditions in general throughout Sydney for the entire week, but Essendon had a strong start. They kicked 2 of the first 3 goals to take an early lead. The pressure was good, but as the quarter went on, Sydney started to get to work, and the home side were able to get the last 3 goals of the opening turn to lead by 11 points at the first break. Now, the rain started to team down throughout the second term, but the Swans dominated last portions of it. However, they missed so many opportunities to put a meaningful break on their opponents. However, Sydney finally split the big sticks late in the second term, and at halftime they led by 27 points. Now, it was goal for goal throughout the entirety of the third term, but it was Essendon who did really well to stay in touch. And they could have been a lot closer on the scoreboard, but unfortunately missed some chances throughout the third term, and they only reduced the halftime margin to just 26 points at the last change. And when the Swans kicked the first goal of the last term, it seemed at that point that the game was done. But Essendon really put on some pressure on Sydney with 3 goals in quick succession, and at the midway point of the final term, a 32-point lead to the Swans was reduced to just 14. Now, the Bombers did send a little bit of a scare through the Swans camp, but in the end, Sydney held on in the final moments to win by that nice 14-point win. So well done to the Swans. They needed this win to just continue on their momentum, hopefully into next year, as finals is out of the question. And Essendon, really good fight from them today. We've heard about their injuries throughout the year, but they've done really well to fight this one out. A couple of thrashings throughout the last fortnight or so, so well done for them to just keep this one really close and somewhat entertaining, even though the game wasn't much of a spectacle. spectacle. But for now, let's move to the statistics of this game. Of course, on the multiple goal kickers for the Swans, Campbell and McInerney with the 2. Essendon, no multiple goal kickers, but with 1 goal, we got Clark, May, Perkins, Kako, and Blackiston. On the disposals for the Swans, Grundy with 39 disposals, Goulden with 30, 28 to both Heaney and Blakey, 27 to McInerney. And for the Dons, McGrath with the 26, 22 to Laverde and Durham, 21 to Roberts and Dersma. And finally, on the AFL fantasy front for the Swans, Grundy with 150, Blakey with the 122, Goulden with the 114, McInerney with the 106, and Cal Mills with the 100. And for Essendon, McGrath with the 92, 77 to both Redmond and Durham, 76 to Merritt, 75 to Pryor. But now let's get to the votes in this game. 3 votes, Brodie Grundy, 2 votes, Nick Blakey, and the 1 vote to Errol Goulden. So next up, we head to the Gold Coast, and the Suns, after a very good performance last week against the Brisbane Lions, continued on their great form, absolutely smashing the young Tigers by 84 points. The Gold Coast 107, the Tigers 23. Now, there's one injury concern from this game, which was Fonte. Went up for a marking contest in the opening term, and when he got back up to his feet, he had an issue with his knee, and unfortunately, he was seen subbed out soon after. But getting to the game itself, it was a strong start for the Gold Coast. They kicked the only 4 goals of the opening term, and the Tigers were only able to get 1 score throughout the first quarter with 1 point. And at quarter time, the Gold Coast led by 24 points. Now, the Gold Coast did get an early goal to start the second quarter, but then the game became very stagnant. No score was able to be seen from both sides. And despite the Tigers being strong at the contest, the Gold Coast were the ones who were getting it on the scoreboard as they kicked the only 2 goals of the second term. And at halftime, they had their opponents goalless, leading by 36 points. And after a pretty embarrassing first half from the Tigers, only having 5 points to their name, they were able to kick the first goal of the third quarter, where then the Gold Coast went to break their younger opponents. The Gold Coast kicked 5 goals, 4 in the third term, and at three-quarter time, they led by 61 points. And they continued to rampage to the final siren in the final quarter. And the Tigers didn't have a second goal to their name until the latter stages of the final term, having 1 goal 11 to the 25-minute mark of the final quarter. But Ryan Mansell kicked a late goal to save some sort of hope for the side, but in the end, the Gold Coast ran home very comfortable winners. So well done to the Suns. Got a nice smashing. They need a bit of a percentage with the ladder really firming up now, but jumped to 5th spot on the ladder with that win. So well done to them. And on the Tigers' point of view, I think they've done well and truly enough throughout the year to prove that they're going to be a team in the next couple of seasons, maybe 3 or 4 years. But today was a bit tough for them. But for now, let's move to the statistics of this game. Of course, on the multiple goal kickers for the Gold Coast, 4 to King, 3 to Humphrey, 2 goals to Reid, Long and Farah. For the Tigers, the highest scorer for them was Ryan Mansell with the 1 goal too. On the disposals for the Suns, Anderson 38, 30 to Noble, 27 to Rao, 26 to Jeffrey, 25 to Miller. And for the Tigers, Banks for the 26, 25 to Hopper, 23 to Prestia, Ross and Short. And finally on the AFL fantasy front for the Gold Coast, 123 to Anderson, 107 to Fiorini, 106 to Rao, 103 to Noble and McAndrew. And for the Tigers, 103 to Banks, 99 to Vlosten, 91 to Prestia, 87 to Nankervis and 85 to Jacob Hopper. But now let's get to the votes for this game. 3 votes, Matt Rao, 2 votes, Noah Anderson, and the 1 vote to Mac Andrew. So next we head to Marvel Stadium. The Demons up against the Eagles. Wasn't really seen as much of a spectacle going into the game, but Melbourne showed some really good signs in the third quarter as they smashed the Eagles to break the game apart. And at the end of the game, the Demons run out really comfortable winners by 83 points. 139 to Melbourne, 56 to the Eagles. Now getting to the game itself, and it was a strong start from the Demons, especially in the midfield. Their midfielders were well on top at clearance, and they dominated on the scoreboard with the first 3 goals of the game to give themselves a handy break. They did really well to dominate the territory battle, and despite missing some chances throughout the opening term, at quarter time they led by a pretty comfortable 15 points. And when they kicked the first 3 goals of the second term, signs were looking quite ominous for the home side. However, the Eagles did steady themselves in the latter parts of the second term with 2 late goals, and at half-time the Demons' lead was whittled down to just 22 points. But after both teams trading goals early in the third term, the Demons made their break. They were able to get 10 goals to 3 in a goal spree in the third quarter, and at three-quarter time, they broke out to a 63-point margin. And despite the teams trading goals throughout the majority of the final term, the Demons finished with the last 3 and in the end recorded a massive 20 goals. So well done to the Melbourne Footy Club. Obviously struggled up forward at times this year, but scored over 130 points. So well done to them and the Eagles. This may go down as one of the worst seasons we've seen in some time from an AFL club. I did talk about it in actually my video essay regarding the worst teams in football history. And we've seen only a handful of clubs go through a year with only 1 win. And the Eagles are destined for that right now. So really disappointing from them. Their season's going to go down as one of an all-time worst. So not really great signs for the West Coast, especially with a couple of injuries to their stars and like Harley Reid and that. So we'll have to wait and see. It's going to be a tough couple of years for the West Coast. But for now, let's move to the statistics of this game, of course, on the multiple goal kickers for the Melbourne Footy Club. Fritsch with the 4, 3 to Petty and Langford, 2 goals to Van Rooyen and Cully. And for the West Coast, sole multiple goal kicker was Jamie Cripps with the 2. On the disposals for the Ds, Salem with the 30, 28 to Oliver, 26 to Pickett, 25 to Viney and Bowie. And for the West Coast, Marrick with 29, 26 to Kelly and McCarthy, 24 to Cole, 23 to Hewitt. And finally on the AFL fantasy front, for Melbourne, Salem with the 113 along with Max Gawn, 103 to Cozzy Pickett, 95 to Oliver and Viney. And for the West Coast Eagles, Marrick with the 112, Duggan with the 93 along with Kelly, 91 to McCarthy and 83 to Tom Cole. So now let's get to the votes. 3 votes Max Gawn, 2 votes Jack Viney and the 1 vote to Cozzy Pickett. So now we head to Adelaide Oval, probably one of the most built up games for round 21, and it lived up to the hype with the Crows and Hawthorn battling it out throughout the entire night. But it was the Crows who regained their top spot for a moment as they won by 14 points. 101 to Adelaide, 87 to the Hawks. But getting to the game itself, and it was a wonderful start for Hawthorn. Adelaide's pressure was pretty good, but the Hawks were the ones who got on the scoreboard early. The visitors kicked the first 5 goals of the game and led by 32 points in the dying minutes of the opening term. But a late goal from the Crows saw them reduce the margin to 26 at the first break. And that goal late in the opening term seemed to spark Adelaide in the second quarter. They absolutely dominated throughout the entirety of the second term and honestly probably could have led by a lot more. With 6 goals, 6 throughout the second term, they led by 16 points at the major break. And when they kicked the next goal early in the third quarter to make it 8 in a row, signs were ominous the Hawthorn were about to be blown off the pitch. However, Hawthorn responded. They kicked the next 5 goals and they regained the lead seemingly out of nowhere. Now, teams traded goals heading into the three-quarter time break, but Hawthorn took a 10-point lead heading into three-quarter time. But again, the Crows would respond. They kicked the first 3 goals of the final term, and it looked like maybe they just had this game won. But Hawthorn responded with 2 of their own and took a slender lead through the midway point of the final quarter. But as we've seen throughout the majority of this season, Adelaide weren't going to lie down. They kicked 3 goals in a row to take the lead back, and in the end were able to hold on for a famous win, probably one of the games of the year, and the Crows were able to take the chocolates. So well done to Adelaide. They jump on top with that win, only for a moment maybe. We'll have to see on Saturday night how the Collingwood and Lions game goes. But well done to the Crows. They're going to be a real contender this year for mine. Their defence is so good, and obviously one of the best attacking teams in the competition. So well done to Adelaide and Hawthorn. They fought it out hard, but in the end, that 5-goal blitz at the start of the game wasn't going to get this one done. They had to fight the entire contest, and Adelaide would just prove too good in the end. But for now, let's move to the statistics of this game, of course, on the multiple goal kickers for the Crows. 4 goals to Thilthorpe, 3 to Rankin and Walker, 2 to Dawson. And for the Hawks, Gunston with 4, Ginnivan with 2. On the disposals for the Crows, Dawson and Keane with the 21, Curtin and Worrell with the 20, 19 to Miller. And for Hawthorn, D'Ambrosio with the 25, 23 to Amon, 22 to Impey and Battle, 20 to Ginnivan. And finally on the AFL fantasy front for the Crows, Dawson 125, O'Brien 96, 93 to Curtin and Thilthorpe, and 91 to Alex Neil-Bullen. And for Hawthorn, Lloyd Meek with the 107, Battle with the 92, Day with the 89, 85 to Impey and 84 to D'Ambrosio. So now let's get to the votes. 3 votes Jordan Dawson, 2 votes Josh Worrell, and the 1 vote to Riley O'Brien. So the first game of the round brought us the Bulldogs and GWS at Marvel Stadium. This was set up as an intriguing contest. The Giants had a few out, but being one of the best teams in the competition in terms of form, they were set up to maybe get a big upset against the Dogs. However, they will quickly extinguish those hopes at quarter time as the Dogs absolutely blitzed their opponents, and midway through the second quarter, the game was done as the Dogs ran out really comfortable winners in the end, smashing the Giants off Marvel Stadium by 88 points. 132 to the Dogs, 44 to the Giants. Now, there were a couple of injuries from this game. First of all, Toby McMullen, who hurt his ankle in the second quarter, he was subbed out soon after, and Jesse Hogan was hampered with an issue with his foot throughout the game. And it's the same foot that has plagued him throughout the entire season. And at the end of the game, Hogan was found on the bench. So I would be a bit surprised if he plays next week with a couple of massive games coming up, as well as finals if they do make it. But getting to the game itself, it was a wonderful start for the Doggies. They dominated the territory battle and kicked the first 3 goals of the game. But the Giants did find their opening goal soon after, but the Dogs again continued to go on their merry way. They kicked a further 3 more goals, and despite missing some chances in the opening term, the home side led by 33 points at quarter time. And the Dogs threatened to put the game to bed early in the second quarter. They kicked 5 goals in the first 15 minutes, and all of a sudden, the margin was over 10 goals. It was an absolute bloodbath, and the GWS simply couldn't stop the rampaging Dogs. However, they were able to kicked 2 of the last 3 goals heading into the halftime break, but the Bulldogs still led by a very comfortable 61 points. But heading into the second half, and it was goal for goal throughout the majority of the third quarter, but the Western Bulldogs did kick 2 late goals, including one on 3-quarter time siren, to increase their halftime lead to 67 at the final break, and the Dogs were out to put their opponents to the sword in the final term. They not only kept the Giants goalless, but they were able to kick 3 of their own to get a very unlikely percentage-boosting win and keep their finals hopes alive. So the Dogs have to continue to win to make it a certainty that they make finals, and that's what they did tonight. Very good performance against the Giants, and GWS, very disappointing. I know they had a few players out, including Toby Green and Jack Buckley, but simply not good enough from them. Probably the hottest team in the comp going into this game. For them to get smashed off the park by 88 points, simply not good enough from them. But for now, let's move to the statistics of this game, of course. On the multiple goal kickers for the Dogs, Darcy and Norton both with 5, McNeil with 3, English with 2. For the Giants, Cadman and Riccardi with the 2 goals apiece. For the Dogs on disposals, Bontempelli with a 27, 26 to Liberatore, 23 to Kennedy, 22 to Dale, 21 to Richards. And for the Giants, Ash with a 36, 29 to Whitfield, 25 to Tom Green, Iden with a 23 along with Finn Callaghan. And finally on the AFL fantasy front for the Dogs, English 129, Norton 113, Bontempelli 97, 89 to Darcy and 87 to Richards. And for the Giants, Ash with the 135, Whitfield 118, Iden 92, Himmelberg 91 and Callaghan with the 89. But now let's get to the votes. 3 votes, Tim English, 2 votes, Aaron Norton, and the 1 vote to Marcus Bontempelli. But guys, thanks for watching this episode of The Review. I hope you did enjoy it. And if you want to listen to the full episode, then make sure to go check us out on Spotify, as you can listen to the full episode there the morning after the round finishes. But that is all from me, guys. Make sure to like and subscribe if you did enjoy it. But for now, we'll catch you all in the next one.